Okay, welcome back, everyone. After a little break, it's hope you had a great Pesach and that everybody is well. Excited to get back to our daily Rashi study. And since it is Monday of Parsha Shmini, we are going to learn Rashi from the second Aliyah in Parsha Shmini, which, as Debbie pointed out, is the Parsha of the death of Nadav and Avihu, a very sad Parsha in many ways. But that story doesn't happen until the third Aliyah, and we are only on the second Aliyah. And Debbie's fire background actually makes more sense for our aliyah today and fits perfectly with the end of this aliyah. So right towards the end of this aliyah, after the whole ceremony of the Yom Hashmini is described, that's what our parsha is, Vahi Yom Hashmini, the eighth day. This is, of course, the eighth day of the inauguration ceremony of the Mishkan. The storyline in the Torah is somewhat skewed, so you have to follow how everything kind of fits together. But at the end of Parshas Pekudei, Moshe Rabbeinu finishes putting up the Mishkan. The 7-day Miluim ceremony is described over there. Moshe Rabbeinu puts up and takes down the Mishkan each of those days. He's in charge of all the ceremonials during that time. He's in charge of putting up the Mishkan, of inaugurating the Mishkan, of all the sacrifices that are brought on those 7 days. And then the eighth day is really the transition day to when Aaron and his sons, the Kohanim, take over the service of the Mishkan, which is going to continue forevermore, and where Moshe takes a step back. So it's really the end of the building stage and the beginning of the inauguration stage, or the stage in which the Mishkan actually becomes used. And our parsha picks up there, Vahi Bayom Shmini. The break from Parshas Pekudei until now has been with the description of various sacrifices. Aside from the break we had for Pesach, where we lost a couple of Shabbases where we would have been reading the Parshas, but even before Pesach, from Pekudei, we went to Vayikra and Tzav, which is description of all the main korbanos. If you know, we had learned many of those Rashis in Vayikra, describing the Korban Ola and the Korban Shlamim and the Korban Mincha, all the korbanos which are brought by the Jewish people. Now, of course, you understand why those two parshios are kind of implanted over there between Pekudei and Shmini, because before Shmini happens, before we actually start using the Mishkan, we need to know what to do with it. We need to know what the sacrifices are and how to bring them, and therefore we have Vayikra and Tzav in the middle. And now Shmini actually goes back to where Parshas Pekudei left off, to the end of Parshas Pekudei, and we hear about the Yom HaShmini, the eighth day of the Miluim ceremony, of the inauguration of the Mishkan ceremony. And the central players here, of course, Aaron and his children, as I mentioned. Moshe calls Aaron and his children. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you have to sacrifice. And pasuk after pasuk, they go through all of these motions to be able to bring the sacrifices. Towards the very end of our aliyah, right before Shlishi, which begins with Debbie's background, Vatetze Eish, okay? But right before Shlishi, the last pasuk of our aliyah says, Vayavo Moshe the Aaron el Moed, Vayetzu, Vayavarchu es ha'am, Vayar kvod Hashem el kol ha'am. Moshe and Aaron enter the Ol Moed, then they leave, then they bless the people, and then the glory of God appears to the people. So Rashi addresses himself to one very strange thing about this pasuk. And really, it's actually two. I mean, he more explicitly addresses one, but two odd things. Number one, the whole day is centered around Aaron and his children. Moshe is no longer involved in the sacrifices. If you look back at these psukim over here, it's all about Aaron and his children. Aaron did this, his children did this. Aaron did this, his children did this. Moshe doesn't feature at all in this whole ceremony. And now all of a sudden, it's Vayavo Moshe ve'Aaron el Ol Moed. Why are Moshe and Aaron entering the Ol Moed? This is Aaron's time. Moshe's out of the picture. Why is Moshe coming back into the picture, going into the Ol Moed with Aaron at this point? Number two, they come out and then they bless the nation. Well, they just blessed the nation. The previous pasuk says, "Vayisa Aaron es yadav el ha'am vayivarchem." Aaron gave them the birchas kohanim. So Aaron is the central player, and yet Moshe and Aaron are mentioned. Aaron just blessed the people, and now it says they're blessing them again. What happened in this pasuk? What is this pasuk doing here? What is this derailment, so to speak, of the story of Aaron and his sacrifices, and Aaron and his role in the Mishkan, and Aaron and his blessing to the people, all of a sudden shifting to an Aaron-Moshe partnership in terms of going into the Mishkan, into the Ol Moed, and then coming out and blessing the people again? So Rashi gives a few answers. I want to share with you the last answer because it is absolutely beautiful. I think it's a very moving answer. Davar acher, kevan shira'a Aaron shekarvu kol hakorbanos v'nasu kol hamasim v'lo yarda shchina liYisrael haya omer umitztarebo. Aaron finished everything. Aaron was the central player. He did everything he was supposed to do. He brought all of the sacrifices. He even blessed the people. He's all done. And he sees that God's glory does not descend upon the Mishkan. And he is quite distressed. He feels like he failed. What did I do wrong? The punchline of any ceremony in the Mishkan is that God's glory comes down, whether that's through a fire, or through a cloud, or through the presence. Somehow it was known that God's presence had come into the Mishkan. If you look back at Parshas Pekudei for a second, the ultimate statement about Moshe's success in building the Mishkan, in Moshe's success of the first 7 days of the inauguration ceremony is they finished all the malacha. He finished his work, he finished his job. And then what happens next? Automatically, Vayechas Ha'anan es Ohel Moed. Uchvod Hashem malas hamishkan. God's cloud covered the Ohel Moed, and God's honor, his glory, filled the Mishkan. That's what's supposed to happen. That's the end of every story of completion. And now Aaron finishes his role, he finishes his story, and it goes flat. Look at the last pasuk. He blesses the people. He comes down from doing all of these sacrifices, period. There is no next pasuk which says, and the glory of God filled the Mishkan, and God's presence was filling the Mishkan. Nothing. Blank. It's as if he failed. And he was so distressed by this. He says, what did I do wrong? I did absolutely everything. Not only is it just implied that that is supposed to be the punchline of this inauguration day, but Moshe had told it to him explicitly in the first aliyah of this parsha. Vayomer Moshe, Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem tasu, v'yira lechem kivod Hashem. Moshe, when he gives them the instructions for that day, for all their sacrifices, he doesn't just give them the instructions and it's assumed that God's glory would fill the Mishkan afterwards. No, he says to them, here's all the things you need to do, the instructions you need to follow, and if you do that, God will dwell in the Mishkan. God will come and dwell in your presence. Wow. Now they do all of it and nothing happens. There is no pasuk which tells us God's glory dwelt. And therefore, Rashi says, Haya omeru mitztarbo, he was very distressed. Amar, Yodea ani shekas HaKadosh Baruch Hu alai, ubishvili lo yarda shchina. Aaron concludes it must be God is mad at me. God is mad at me because I was a central figure in creating the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf once upon a time, and God never forgave me for that. And because of that, God is preventing his presence from dwelling amongst the people. Amar lo Moshe. So Moshe says to Moshe says to him, Moshe kach asita li shenichnasti v'nispayashti. He says to Moshe, this is what you do to me? I go in, I embarrass myself. This is what you put me up to? This is what you charged me to do? Miyad nichnas Moshe ubikesh rachamim. V'yarda shchina Yisrael. Immediately, Moshe goes in with Aaron to the Ohel Moed, asks for mercy on his behalf, and then Yarda Shchina Yisrael. The presence of God comes down and there is success, which is why the next aliyah begins. The fire from God comes down and consumes the sacrifices on the Mizbech. God's presence does descend. It does enter the Ohel Moed. All is well. The story is fulfilled in the way it's supposed to be. I wanted to share this Rashi, first of all, because it helps to put this whole parsha in perspective and helps to fill in the blanks in the psukim, which you might have not noticed. You know, the punchline doesn't really come at the end. You might not have noticed that, and so this Rashi helps to fill that in, helps to answer why Moshe is part of this picture again. It also just leaves us with a beautiful feeling of camaraderie and love and brothership between Moshe and Aaron, that Aaron was really humanly distressed over his past. We'll come back to that in future Rashis, perhaps, as we go through the Parsha. It weighs on him greatly. He's uncertain about his past and about his status, but Moshe, his loving brother, jumps in to try to take care of him, to try to be there for him, to try to intercede on his behalf. In a loving moment, they go in together, They intercede together. God listens and accepts their prayers, and they go out together to bless the people in a beautiful scene. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and we will see you, God willing, tomorrow. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.